Hi, Scott. How are you?
Hey, Mark. Doing great. How about yourself?
Oh man, I'm in a different room, traveling and recording podcasts. So that's exciting.
Great. Well, we'll see how it goes then.
Well, we're thrilled. This is an episode that's in my wheelhouse. You know, rare disease and a company BioMarin that we're very familiar with, and someone who we've crossed paths with over the years. I know you know Alexander as well.
Yeah, this is great. This is a topic we've been meaning to get to for some time, as you know, and it's a perfect time to do that. And I think we've got the perfect guest as well. I've known Alexander for years. We've worked together in the industry several times, and he actually has helped me quite a bit with some of my classes that I teach at Berkeley as well. And he's certainly a real expert in the rare disease space.
Well, welcome to the show, Alexander.
It's great to be here. Really looking forward to this conversation. So, Mark and Scott, thanks for having me on your podcast.
We like to, help people understand, someone like yourself, your career journey. I know we've crossed paths at pathogenesis that goes way back to some way longer than maybe we want to realize. But for you, tell us a little bit about your career journey, because you've had, a lot of different roles, and including in patient services and everything. So we're just thrilled that you're here to help us today. So why don't you give us a little bit of your background and how you got to take on this role at BioMarin?
Yes, I mean, over 30 years in the industry, in biotech and pharma, in both large companies, small companies, and medium-sized companies. And I've really enjoyed that breadth. So, started off, interned at Eli Lilly, opened my eyes to the industry, joined GSK, what was then SmithKline Beecham, now GSK, after graduate school. Then moved to Pathogenesis, launched their first drug in cystic fibrosis in the United States. And then made the move to Novartis in Europe, worked with them in 3 countries in Europe, and then moved to Genentech back in 2005, and spent 18 years at Genentech and Roche. The last 4 years at Genentech, I was CEO of Genentech. And then in 2023, made the move to BioMarin, to be the CEO of BioMarin. Really a great opportunity from my perspective to really live the mission. I think the rare disease space is incredibly meaningful and important, and that's what I wanted to focus on. But also an opportunity at BioMarin, I believe, to build an iconic biotech company focused on genetically defined conditions in rare diseases. So, I'm really loving what I'm doing now in this stage of my career.
Yeah, it's great to hear, Alexander. And for today, as you know, we're a podcast that's focused primarily on patient access and affordability. I know those are topics that you've been very passionate about in your career and that you've worked deeply in as well, including during our time together at Genentech, where you led Access Solutions. I'd be interested in how you connect that to the through story of your development and your current role as a CEO. How does it better inform you?
I had an opportunity to work in access in a number of different roles in a number of different regions around the world throughout my career, and it's been one of the sort of consistent parts. I've moved away and done other things, and then come back to access. And it's, I think it's been hugely important part of my career. I think it's given me a perspective that's been hugely valuable. In Europe, as you well know, and I worked in the UK, and teams that I was responsible for did some of the first NICE submissions at the beginning of NICE, through to heading up market access for Europe for Novartis, and then obviously the time in the US, heading up Access Solutions, where we work together, Scott.
Sure.
In the managed care organization at Genentech, an opportunity to experience access in a very different sort of form than is seen in the single payer European markets. and Access Solutions, incredible organization at Genentech, and surrounded by in my office at Genentech, surrounded by case managers and reimbursement specialists, talking to patients and to providers. I would often, listen into those conversations to educate myself and to understand the sorts of challenges that patients were facing. In some cases, directly interacted with providers. Many cases with providers directly. In some cases, also with patients, and helping them navigate through the insurance system in the United States, and our very fragmented system and all the complexities, and got really a first-hand perspective. I draw on that every day. I mean, I feel relatively comfortable with a very complex, fast-moving, ever-changing area. I'm humbled by it, but I know enough to be dangerous. And now I'm looking at access from a an exclusively rare disease perspective, and it's really interesting to see many of the issues and the challenges that we faced in other disease areas starting to be real issues in rare disease. So I'm finding that background is actually becoming more important. I'm drawing upon it more on a daily basis now.
You mentioned some of the issues that you're starting to see that are coming to rare disease, right? And again, I love your products. You guys really, truly are just like some MPS and some incredible rare diseases that you're supporting. Like, what is some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing? Like, that is access, has it gotten harder in the last few years? Is it, is there something in particular that's jumping out at you that you're worried about or concerned about? Because the next question, we're going to turn to Washington, D.C. So
Okay, good.
I want to preface that. That's where we're going.
No, I appreciate you, Mark, telling me where we're heading.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would differentiate, and I hope in this conversation we'll talk about access globally and outside the United States, as well as in the United States. It's really quite different issues, as you would expect, given that the systems are so very different. In the US, we're now increasingly seeing managed care plans starting to manage rare diseases. And it's really the topic of utilization management, and specifically prior authorizations, which is starting to be an issue. And if you think about the journey that patients and actually caregivers, because most of our drugs are focused on pediatric rare diseases, and so it's really the caregiver, the parents, in many cases, who are trying to navigate through our insurance system, dealing with a very significant diagnosis. In some cases, they receive that diagnosis before their child's birth, and there's a real urgency to treat, given the nature of these diseases and the importance of these therapies. And we're seeing real challenges now with prior authorizations. Sometimes they can take as long as 6 months to navigate through. And these, again, this is like we see in other disease areas, that they can appear, when there's a dosage change, that can result in another prior authorization process, of course, on an annual basis. And the angst that these families go through, and the implications for even small interruptions treatment, these are real issues.
Well, again, we both go back to roots with CF and the fact that back then you had to prove every year that you have this genetic disease. Like, it didn't go away,
Exactly.
Like you were born with it. I mean, why are you making us go through this every single year?
This should be an area, not, obviously given the burden of the disease and the profound difference these treatments make, but you're right. You have this disease. It's definitively proven that you have this genetic mutation which is driving your disease. This should be really the clearest case in terms of really being sure that, this is a population who should be treated. And then we've got, the pernicious issue, obviously, of, again, you see it in other therapy areas, but out-of-pocket costs, which are obviously also an issue. Now, I'm sure, and here I am, talking to two experts, and I always really enjoyed, Scott, our more philosophical conversations around the topic of access. And I do understand everybody is trying to figure this stuff out, but clearly the issue of using out-of-pocket costs to ensure that there's skin in the game from a patient perspective. I mean, it's just awful in these disease areas. I mean, really, really awful.
I'm always struck too that, patients like this are being managed by sub specialists, and the notion that, an administrative oversight, over the shoulder is going to add much value to the clinical decision making there is pretty limited, but
you're absolutely right.
That is the system we have. So let's make the pivot that Mark suggested there a moment ago. We would be very interested in hearing your thoughts about what's happening in DC these days, Alexander. Generally, but also obviously as it relates to the rare patients as well. And what are the moving parts that you're in particular keeping an eye on?
I mean, there's so much going on in Washington, and it's a mixed bag. There's some really positive potential developments. So we do see really good bipartisan support for orphan diseases, and that continues. And we see that pulled through in many cases into important legislation. That is really wonderful. That is really wonderful to see. And there's understandably there's people who feel enormous pride in the role that legislation has played in creating the incentives that have basically allowed so much innovation. We have 8 drugs, 6 of them are first-in-disease treatments. It's absolutely clear that without the Orphan Drug Act and the incentives associated with that, that we wouldn't have had this progress, and we've got two phase 3s reading out this year for potentially first-in-disease treatments. I mean, it's really exciting, but it is dependent on the support from policymakers. So, what are some of the things that are in play right now? I first want to say, from a sort of overall standpoint with regard to legislation and access, I'm very excited about the bipartisan support for focusing on PBMs and again, sort of really ensuring that the system is working to ultimately to benefit patients and to really get the market to work more efficiently. That's really good. In the rare disease space, there is progress right now and pending legislation, which we're very excited about, to really ensure that these utilization tools, particularly prior authorizations in rare diseases, are more restricted. That physicians, as you mentioned, Scott, these subspecialists, that they really are the decision makers and not the health plans second guessing what these children need. So, there's specifically the accountability for utilizations tools that harm rare disease patients Act. That's a real mouthful. That's why I had to. It's pending legislation. It's part of the EPIC Act that they're considering right now. And it's really, really exciting, and it's also inspiring to see the level of bipartisan support. So both Republicans and Democrats signing on to this legislation, and hopefully we'll make progress in this space.
If I could, though, now you mentioned that you have 2 products in phase 3 that are reading out, and clearly you've been CEO now, Genentech and now BioMarin, so you have to look both, products today as well as products that are reading out, as well as the long-term investment that's necessary in R&D. Like, how much does the some of the changes that's happened in Washington impact some of those decisions?
It's interesting taking a step back, and I often like my barbecues are more interesting than this, but it's sort of the proverbial, family or friends barbecue. Who I explained to people, outside our industry, it took BioMarin over 20 years before it turned profitable. Uh, focusing on the areas of rare diseases. I mean, and there was multiple products before it finally got to that scale, where there was a return essentially for the investors who originally invested in the company. So anything that creates uncertainty, that impacts the potential return on the investors' capital, can mean we do X versus Y, or we don't do Z. So topics like the IRA and MFN, um, to some extent 340B, certainly the Medicaid drug rebate, anything that affects Medicaid, given the nature of our patient population, it's the after commercial, it's by far our largest payer. So it's about a third of our patients in the United States are covered by Medicaid, as you would expect. We're very, very sensitive to policy changes in those areas. And that's the reality, is that, again, uh, essentially this is a global thing, but it's certainly in the US that private industry is the best way to take the enormous long-term risks associated with developing breakthrough treatments. It does require us to have a path to being able to ensure that we're going to make a return on that investor money to be able to go after the next disease. Big picture again, we've only at the moment got approved treatments for 5% of rare diseases, and 2/3 of rare diseases affect children. So there's a lot of work to be done. And as a society, we've got to make sure that there's a sufficient level of return that allows companies to continue to invest, in the next series of treatments. And that's obviously, this is where these things are enormously hard from a policy standpoint. So I would say a long way of answering is that they are factoring in. We're less in the Medicare space, so IRA and drug negotiation is less of an issue. MFN is more of a concern by considerable margin, and that maybe gets us a little bit into touching on the European context, where HTA really does struggle to value pediatric rare diseases, and I would love to touch on that, because it's a real access challenge in many of the European countries when it comes to rare diseases. The access environment in the United States is much, much better. It's complex. In many cases, we don't have access to, or patients don't have access to our treatments in the HTA countries, and it's because of the way that HTA is done, whereby it really doesn't take into account the nature of the prior health state, the fact that unfortunately these patients already have a level of disability, and that disability is sustained, and it undervalues the significant improvement in their quality of life, and the effect on their caregivers and on their extended family. As you well know, Mark and Scott, that's the nature of these pediatric rare diseases. Is it's you get this diagnosis, and it changes the whole family's life.
Yeah.
We've seen time and time again that these HTAs don't really take these things into account, and as a result, it's heartbreaking seeing the relative lack of access in many European countries.
So just to follow up on that a little bit, Alexander. So, here in the US, we don't have an HTA-based system, but there are lots of folks, academics, policy influencers and so on who obviously have an appreciation for those techniques and that approach to thinking, I'll say. And so maybe if we could just peel back a little bit more, um, what's your view generally about the U.S.'s thinking as it relates to these topics, and how much do we in the U.S. Properly understand and value rare disease innovation, or not in your eyes?
Yes, I would say it's relatively much better in the United States.
Yeah.
But as I was mentioning, the trend is a concerning one. But overall, that there is understanding of the value and the importance of treating these patients and doing it as quickly as possible. There's certainly improvements. We can touch on some of those. And I think particularly is on my mind is that the diagnostic journey for many patients, and definitely should be touching on that. It's less of an access issue, but it's taking too long for parents, caregivers that they know that there's something wrong with their child. Their pediatrician knows it, but in some cases they're not diagnosed until they're 5 or 6, and they're bounced around specialists. And that the topic of newborn screening is an important one. But I'm getting off the purely access topic. I would say, like with most things, and Scott, you will know this hopefully from working with me, is that it's we all have responsibility here to make this better, and from our standpoint, we've got to do a better job in the industry at bridging from the regulatory data sets, which are expedited and should be expedited in the rare disease space, but often don't provide meaningful data to payers to really understand the value. So it's on us to use registries and real world evidence to show the benefits and the value of the treatments, to understand which of the populations which benefit the most. And that's something that we've got to do much, much better. I'll give you an example in achondroplasia, which is the primary genetic cause of dwarfism. The regulatory endpoint, the FDA, is annualized growth velocity, essentially how much additional height you get for every year of treatment. The reality and the most important thing to caregivers and physicians is really not height, but it's all the other associated disease burden associated with achondroplasia. Things like spinal surgeries later on in life. And, it's incumbent on us to get regulatory approval, and then really understand how the drug does and does not, affect the things which are most important to patients, to caregivers, to physicians, and society overall. So, that's a change for the industry. Certainly, I think, and I don't want to be too black and white about it, but I think there used to be this philosophy, right? We got this drug approved in this disease. Let's go and now focus on this next disease. And we're understanding that the work significantly continues beyond to produce really important, meaningful data after the point of regulatory approval. Again, this is not atypical. It's just coming to rare disease a little later than it came to almost every other disease area.
That's a really important point, though.
No, but again, like for years, people thought just approval is the finish line, and it's just the starting line, right? It's just the starting line.
You mentioned the health technology assessments being done outside the U.S. and how they didn't interact well sometimes with the rare disease populations. Could you just peel that back a little bit more? What happens technically in those assessments that puts those conditions at a disadvantage?
Yeah. So, for example, let's go with the UK system and NICE and the use of quality adjusted life years. Um, to be able to really understand the value, uh, in many of these diseases, the lysosomal storage disorders, for example. Um, the prior to treatment state versus the post treatment state, and really making sure that the improvement is really clearly valued. Um, uh, the reality, and I mentioned this. This is these treatments can be really profound in terms of, say, delaying progression to disability. But unfortunately, uh, we're still at the point where perhaps disability still occurs. It just happens later,
Right.
and the emphasis on life years saved versus really important uh, uh, differences versus treatment, not only for that patient but also for their family and that family's whole life. We just don't see that fully captured in the way these drugs are assessed. I think this is actually understood by these systems, but you know they have their way of doing these things, and
And their budget challenges and
yeah,
right.
we've seen for years how long it's taken NICE, for example, to inflation adjust even their cost per quality, but clearly, that cost per quality really, again, doesn't capture rare disease at that level. If it is, say, £30,000, you just would not see the ability to invest in research and development to improve the lives of these patients with these sorts of diseases. It's too low a threshold, doesn't capture the value, it's not sensitive or sophisticated enough. There should be a separate system, I believe, for rare diseases.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great idea because, again, roots in the cystic fibrosis world where a child staying on the holding on the step, like we would call it, like, if you just stay on that step for as long as possible, that's success. And yet you talk to payers and they'd be like, well, are they going up? No, the key is to never go down the steps, right? To never have that deteriorating pulmonary function. And so, but let's turn to, in the US, like the employer market, the payers and others, right? Like, um, they're going to say that these drugs cost too much, right? And so, and again, like you said, they're not always recognizing the total value. How do we sort of move forward with this dialogue so that employers, payers, and others in the U.S. start to understand the sort of the totality of value that these products bring?
I think the best systems are ones where the patients, the caregivers, in these pediatric diseases, their voice is heard, and it's really understood, what value means in terms of what's most important to them. Um, there's also the responsibility on, as I said, on the companies to produce that evidence. We work, as you both know. This is one of the aspects of rare disease. I mean, you work with patients right from the very outset. I mean, it's actually how BioMarin was founded. Was a dad who refused to accept that there was no treatment option for his son with MPS, and that's how the company started. So we're really involved, and I think payers should be really understanding that, and also relying on the specialists and the subspecialists involved with this, and the very stringent, obviously, diagnostic criteria that are used.
I agree. Because it's so important. Are you getting any pushback on other aspects of of pricing, whether it's, gene therapy or others? Like some of your products are at the top of the list of some of these drugs, and so, or the cost of the drugs. How are you overcoming some of those discussions or barriers?
We're working to be as creative as we possibly can be to try and ensure that access is not an issue. So we've had some experience with commercializing in gene therapy, and we use their outcomes based agreements with payers. The health technology appraisal there and the cost per quality was really very positive. But there, the issue was also right is obviously again, I'm talking to such specialists, both yourselves and no doubt your audience here. But we were mindful, obviously, of the reality is of patients moving insurance, and payers wanting to make sure that they were appropriately paying for a one-time treatment in an affordable way, and then obviously also dealing with the predictability aspects of it. The reality is that these are still individually rare diseases, and that the individual budget impact is really quite small. It's a fascinating aspect for, again, you're both students of the industry. I mean, I think you'll find this interesting that 2/3 of our revenue as a company is outside the United States. That's the exact opposite to all the big pharma players, where the US is essentially 2/3 of their revenue. That's the sort of typical average, and that's because there's the prevalent populations. In some cases, these genetic disorders, it goes with population size, and in some cases, it's actually skewed in certain regions of the world, and we go where the patients are. And what this should probably, trigger in your mind is, okay, if 2/3 of our revenue is outside the United States, then there is a willingness to pay outside the United States. And we are actually, we're very focused and very successful in South America and in the Middle East and in Asia. And in those countries, in many cases, the public healthcare system is investing and paying for rare disease treatments. I find that really interesting and also inspiring. That they see these are the most vulnerable population with a profound need. They also, and the reality of it is, again, from a budget impact perspective, it's really quite small, and they can have a profound impact on those individual patients. And then you go to Europe, single payer systems, and that's where we have the worst access.
Super interesting.
And
Yeah.
it is absolutely fascinating.
Alexander, back to BioMarin for a second. That company as well has a great reputation for being deeply committed to patient services. How do you think about the role of manufacturer-sponsored patient support programs in these circumstances?
Oh, it's hugely important. Absolutely. If you're going to operate in these spaces in the United States, you really need to support patients through the entire, access process. So I'm very proud of the program that we have. It's called Rare Connections. It has the individualized case manager right from the very, very start that works with the family and navigating their insurance coverage. If they have issues with affording their medicine, they have a proposal. They have programs that can support the patients. And as I mentioned before, this is ongoing. In many cases, patients are on these drugs for their entire lives. So they're their insurer will change, and we have to be there and support those patients through those stages. And then, as we also mentioned, it's not only in those stages where often they need help to navigate through the insurance coverage. We have, and this is fairly typical for rare disease companies, although I think we have a little bit of a additional focus on it. We have also nurses who are deployed across the country that go to the patient's home to meet with the family. They train them on how to take the treatment, and they act as a resource and often first point of contact. They're not in many cases, reimbursement experts, but we have those that can be triaged in to support the family, because this is clearly, they've got the stress of this is the nature of our healthcare system. They have the stress of the disease, and then they have this other stress of, is my insurance gonna continue to cover this treatment, which is having such a profound difference in my child's life. And we're there with them through that journey. And again, I want to say that I think, in the US, we are fortunate, but we shouldn't be complacent about it. The level of access is overall really, really good. We just deal with some of the friction of the system. Much of it, I would give the benefit of the doubt, is unintended.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's a reality, and that is the role that's the role we take on and take very, very seriously. And I really like particularly these nurses who are create actually in many cases a very, very close relationship with that family, all the way through from that initial diagnosis, which can be quite a profound thing that the family has to navigate. At that point, they're there and able to answer many of the questions that the family have around, what to expect, and what is the experience here, and can you help me with this, or can you help me with that? And that's it. It's necessary. It's also a privilege to play that role.
If I could, though, you mentioned just quickly, like rare disease potentially could have its own approach, right? Like we should be thinking about it a little, differently. If you had a chance to sort of look out 5 years, right? Like, and sort of map out the best, and we'll just focus on the US if we could, like the best access and affordability for rare disease patients. Where would you like to see things go in the US?
I would like to see really the whole topic of utilization management and prior authorizations basically fence posted into being a lot more patient friendly associated with these diseases. I mean, to take 6 months to do a prior authorization, to do that on an annual basis for a genetic rare disease, that is inappropriate. I think out-of-pocket costs, certainly when you get into the topic of co-insurance, et cetera, I think it's a real issue. It becomes a significant barrier to access. So I'd like it to be more streamlined. I think that by involving the caregiver community in system-wide levels of discussion of the disease, I think is also really is really important. So I think there's forums that the payers should work cooperatively with the patient groups to really understand that. I recognize there are so many rare diseases, but I think those sorts of things are really important.
Well, Alexander, to wrap us up, we ask all of our guests if they had a magic wand, what would they use it for? Would you use it for those changes, or are there some other ideas as well? What's your prescription for better access?
There are so many that I feel like if I wish I had a sort of a quiver of magic wands.
Yeah.
I think it's out-of-pocket costs and utilization management in the United States for rare diseases. I think it's how HTA is done for rare diseases outside the United States. We haven't even got onto the topic of developing countries and access for these sorts of treatments. So there's a whole raft of them. If you were forcing me to choose one, I would say it's probably the HTA, because I think increasingly, that is a topic not only in Europe but increasingly in the United States. So I think, and that is where perhaps we can all work together to shape that in the right direction. That maybe we can learn from what has not worked elsewhere, and it's where possibly you can really formalize the role of caregivers and patient advocates, and also the specialists in that particular area who really understand the disease and also the benefits and the limitations of the treatments, to really make sure that we think about this in a holistic, methodical way. That would be my magic wand, I think.
That's a good one. That's the first one from the quiver.
Well, I think it also is just so fundamental, right? Like
It
or
is,
foundational.
yeah.
Like it really would impact so many other areas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us for our podcast. And now, if you don't mind staying a few more minutes, we have a opportunity for Scott and I to sort of recap today and sort of key points and some key messages that we think it's important for our listeners to sort of walk away with.
Great.
Scott, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So, well, as always, I always enjoy speaking with Alexander, and it's been great today. It was interesting for me to hear, that reimbursement challenges and utilization management here in the States are coming even to rare diseases, and how much so, and how much, that shows up. It's just an extension of the themes that we've, traveled over the last several years now, Mark. I liked his comment about the importance of value demonstration by manufacturers beyond the initial regulatory approval. I think that's actually something that's quite powerful. And especially, as he was just saying here at the end about the HTA, in an HTA world, man, that stuff is like incredibly important for the manufacturers to do. I was super interested to hear about the challenges of the European system, European systems using the HTA, and the impact of that, and the importance then of the role it plays. But also, we know that happens not in a vacuum. It happens within the budget constraints that, those systems also impose, and the two interrelate there. But at the same time, I was intrigued to hear that, markets like South America and the Middle East and Asia actually demonstrate a willingness to pay, which is really remarkable. I like the idea maybe rare should have its own differentiated approach, for some of these topics and questions and challenges. And then the other kernel here, there's always so many, when I listened
Right.
to Alexander. But the other one was just the challenge of diagnosis in these states that, that can prolong things much more actually than the reimbursement and utilization management kinds of stuff. And it does strike me that that's so important that we should have a more concerted effort on helping patients navigate that, figure that out.
Well, those are all great points. And again, for me, my career now is over 40 years, and my time with cystic fibrosis, that was from day one, right? Like we had a
Yeah.
CF week, and then we had CF month, and just to try to help everybody understand what these symptoms are and get to the specialist, right? And so, I think that now, like he said, we only have treatments for 5% of the rare diseases. There's so many rare diseases, but if you're a pediatrician, you may not see one your whole career, right? And that's what it means to have a rare disease. And so, and these families, of course, as he said, are just struggling. For me, I think what I took away with is that's an example of how rare disease, everything is amplified. Like it's to a magnitude of 10,
Yeah.
whether it's the process for diagnosis, the impact on the family, the disease burden and the comorbidities, right? Like all of those things just get amplified with rare diseases. And therefore, the support is needed, right? The hands-on support, the nursing, the other things that are needed, that just everything again is just amplified. I'm also taken away with the fact that, or not that I'm on the boards of all of these pharmaceutical biotech companies, but every single CEO should have a stint through access and
Yeah.
affordability, right?
Yeah.
Because it positions you. It's why you're in your business, right? And I think it's great that to have a CEO like Alexander, who's been in the trenches with us, doing what we've done through our careers. I think it's just a great perspective. And then I will say that, and I want to do this also for our listeners because we talked about it throughout, and that is, I don't think people understand in this country. One of the challenges we have is that people change insurance. Whether you're in Europe or other countries, sometimes there's this umbrella that takes care of everything, right? But in this country, we have people change insurance, and as a result, the more delay that there can be, the less they're on the hook, right? So if you're changing every 2 years and you've delayed it for whatever 6 months or 9 months before they started treatment, your cost is going to be lower, and that's why I think at some point, we need a macro solution in the U.S. for rare disease. I mean, I'll just come out and say it, right? The government, every payer should fund into this, so that they contribute, and then there's a global fund that is administered through the government, and the government provides a backstop, because the short-term thinking of these payers is, I understand it because that's their business, but it's not good for the rare disease patients, and I think there's other ways for us to do this.
That's interesting. I like that. It reminds me of the conversations we had about sort of important public health interventions that extend beyond any single insurer's commitment, to a patient, and whether or not there's a role for the government to backstop that sort of thing as well,
Exactly.
beyond the couple examples that we have where that's done. Anyway, awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to the day we give you the quiver of magic wands, Mark.
There we go. There we go. Well, Alexander, thank you.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for joining us, Alexander. Great seeing you.
Well, we appreciate it. And for all of our listeners, we'll have show notes available for you to be able to pull up things like the EPIC Act and others. And as always, thank you for joining us. If you have questions or suggestions for future episodes, please send us an email at comments@prescriptionforbetterAccess, spell it all out, .com. And thank you to my co-host, Dr. Scott Howell, and thank you again to our guest, Alexander Hardy. Have a good day, everybody.
Resonate.